the very first debate between Beto O'Rourke and the MILF porn-loving, tonsil-stone-eating Texas Senator Ted Cruz took place, and it was certainly interesting, and I wanted to give you guys my analysis of the event, but before I even get to any of the substance, I do have to preface this video by saying it's very difficult for me to be objective here, and I am tempted to declare Beto O'Rourke the winner, but I don't know if that's just because I hate Ted Cruz so much. Impartiality is going to be very difficult because Ted Cruz is such a loathsome, fake individual that it's difficult to try to see past that. But with that being said, I'm going to try to do my best and trying to remove myself from the bias. But Beto O'Rourke maybe had a slight edge over Ted Cruz, and I'm going to get to some specific instances here that I found the most interesting. But just generally speaking, I think that Beto had the most viral moments throughout the course of the debate, but I think he failed to put Ted Cruz on the defensive for the entirety of the debate, unlike Cynthia Nixon, who challenged Andrew Cuomo in New York's gubernatorial primary, and at the debate, she had him defending himself for the entirety of that debate. But in this situation, I think that Beto O'Rourke, even though he kind of kept Ted Cruz on his toes, Ted Cruz also had Beto O'Rourke on the defensive as well. So I think that they both played offense and defense probably equally throughout the course of the debate. And one thing that I noticed, however, is that Ted Cruz tried to spin Beto's positives into negatives, but Beto O'Rourke was very well versed in policy, so I think that he rebutted a lot of Ted Cruz's attacks on him. Now, both of them kind of irritated me. I don't think it's possible for anyone to irritate me as much as Ted Cruz, but they both came off as very rehearsed, scripted, focus group-driven politicians, and I don't understand why that's the case in 2018 when Donald Trump is president. Just be real. I mean, you had Beto O'Rourke doing that politician point when he talks. Normal people don't talk like that. Whenever you see someone pointing like this and talking, it's either a Republican or a Democrat. Only politicians do this, and it's the fakest thing in the world. Fakest thing ever. So stop doing that, Beto. And I understand that that is the dumbest complaint that I have, but it's grating on my nerves and I can't handle it. So for that reason alone, I think that they both are equally focus group driven and strategic minded politicians. Of course, nobody can possibly be as fake as Ted Cruz, but Beto certainly, he has his issues, right? He has his issues. He's not 100% progressive. He has not assured voters that he will sign on to Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All bill in the event he is elected. He hasn't co-sponsored HR 676, so he hasn't passed a lot of progressive litmus tests just yet, and I've previously kind of put him in the same category as Elizabeth Warren, being somewhat progressive, but not as progressive as Bernie Sanders. And I think I'd even put him a step below Elizabeth Warren, specifically because of the Medicare for All issue. So there are issues that I have with Beto O'Rourke. But with that being said, I don't think he did a bad job here. And, I think that they both kind of held their own. But I don't know if Beto moved the needle enough, which is really what you wanted. You wanted him to destroy Ted Cruz in this debate, and I just don't necessarily think that happened. However, Ted Cruz, I think it's very likely that he came off as an obvious liar in certain portions here, because he had positions that were just indefensible. So as many of you seen on Twitter prior to the debate, Ted Cruz posted a video with a comment saying, in Beto O'Rourke's own words, and many people, myself included, were wondering what was controversial about what Beto said here, because he was giving a phenomenal speech about racial injustice and police brutality against unarmed Black Americans, and the crowd was overwhelmingly on his side. So many people pointed out that this seemed like an advertisement for Beto O'Rourke. So I genuinely couldn't figure out what Ted Cruz's objection was here. He was talking about Botham Jean, but we got some insight as to why Ted Cruz didn't like what Beto was saying here. And this is one of many examples during the debate that show that Ted Cruz has positions that are just downright indefensible.
What happened to Mr. John was horrific. Nobody should be in their own home and be shot and killed in their own home. It was tragic. Now, the officer, as I understand it, has contended that it was a tragic mistake. It was a case where she thought she was in her own apartment. She thought he was an intruder. Right now, today, I don't know what happened that evening. Congressman O'Rourke doesn't know what happened that evening. But he immediately called for firing the officer. I think that's a mistake. Look, we have a criminal justice system that will determine what happened that night. If she violated the law, if she did that intentionally, she'll face the consequences. But without knowing the facts before a trial, before a jury's heard the evidence, Congressman O'Rourke is ready to convict her, ready to fire her.
So notice what Ted Cruz is doing here. He is moving the goalpost because in saying that Amber should be fired, well, Ted Cruz is conflating that to Beto O'Rourke being against this police officer's due process rights. But Beto isn't saying she should be thrown in jail for the rest of her life. He's saying that she should be fired, which is a conclusion that any reasonable person would come to, even if you accept the officer's version of what happened. Because if an officer is too stupid to identify her own apartment and ends up killing someone as a result of her own stupidity, then clearly she's not capable of wielding a deadly weapon, nor is she capable of responsibly policing a community that she's supposed to protect and look out for. And she was fired. Does that mean that her due process rights were violated? Well, let me ask you this. In the event your employer wanted to fire you, would they put you before a trial of a judge and a jury of your peers and have this entire process before they fire you? Of course not. They just fire you. So what Ted Cruz is doing here is falsely accusing Beto O'Rourke of being against her due process rights when that's not true. And by saying this, he's inadvertently promoting this idea that police officers are above the law, and he demonstrated that he has no regard for unarmed Black Americans that are killed by police officers in this country with impunity, because when he was asked about the statistical reality of Black Americans dying more so at the hands of cops than white Americans, he dodged the question. Now, Ted Cruz went on to imply that even suggesting that this statistical reality is true is harmful, and this led to a pretty heated moment during the debate.
That rhetoric does damage. That rhetoric divides us on race. It inflames hatred. We should be bringing people together instead of suggesting the police are risking their lives to protect all of us, to protect African Americans, to protect Hispanics, and turning people against the police, I think is profoundly irresponsible.
This is why people don't like Washington, D.C. You just said something that I did not say.
What did you not say?
Attributed it to me.
What did you not say?
I'm not going to repeat. I'm not going to repeat the slander and the mischaracterization. I'm not going to repeat the slander and mischaracterization. No, this is your trick in the trade. to confuse and to incite based on fear and not to speak the truth. This is a very serious issue, and it warrants the truth and the facts.
All right, so
now, I think that Beto had the right instinct to call Ted Cruz out for lying and trying to basically mislead people about what Beto said. However, he states, I'm not going to repeat the slander or mischaracterization. Well, why not? It would have been more impactful to the audience if you actually bring up that specific thing you said and compare it with what Ted Cruz said and how he characterized it and show that he's a liar, because we all know he's a bullshitter. So you had an opportunity to prove that he's lying or being intentionally deceitful, and you chose not to do that. I don't get that. So I'm glad that Beto O'Rourke felt the need to call that out, because that's the right thing to do. But I mean, you take it a step further and you actually demonstrate exactly how Ted Cruz is a liar and how he plays loose with the facts. So I don't understand why Beto didn't capitalize on that opportunity he was given in this debate. It would have been huge for him. So in my opinion, that was a missed opportunity on Beto's part. And the subject of protests during the national anthem came up, and Ted Cruz put his hypocrisy on full display, and I just don't think that Beto was forceful enough in calling out Ted Cruz's hypocrisy here.
And that's one of the reasons I'm proud to be a member of the Party of Lincoln, a member that stands for equal rights for everyone, regardless of what race, what ethnicity. Every human being is a creation of God that our Constitution protects. But nowhere in his answer did he address the fact that when you have people during the national anthem taking a knee, refusing to stand for the national anthem, that you're disrespecting the millions of veterans, the millions of soldiers and sailors and airmen and Marines that risk and fight and die to protect that flag and to protect our liberty. And to be clear, everyone has a right to protest. You have a right to speak. But you could speak in a way that doesn't disrespect the flag, that doesn't disrespect the national anthem. And I'll tell you, those civil rights protesters would be astonished if the protest were manifesting and burning the flag. Dr. King, that's not something Dr. King stood for. He stood
Senator
for justice without disrespecting the men and women who fight for this country.
You heard Senator Cruz's answer. First of all, he again tried to mislead you by taking a peaceful protest during the national anthem to burning a flag. No one here, myself included, has suggested that anyone should be doing that. He also grounded his answer in partisanship, talking about the GOP being better than the Democrats. Listen, I could care less about either party at this moment. At this deeply divided, highly polarized time in our history, this moment calls for all of us, regardless of party or any other difference of race or sexual orientation, how many generations you've been here, or whether you just got here yesterday, we need to come together for this country that we love so much.
So, in that clip, Ted Cruz gave Beto a huge gift.
I'm proud to be a member of the party of Lincoln, a member that stands for equal rights for everyone.
He literally said, with a straight face in front of everyone on that debate stage, that the Republican Party is the party of equal rights. He said that he's in favor of equal rights. At that moment is where, if I were Beto, I would just unleash on Ted Cruz. I'd ask him why he's against transgender people using the bathroom of their choice. Why is he against marriage equality? Why does he believe it's acceptable for employers to fire people just for being gay? Why doesn't he care that Black Americans are being killed by police officers with impunity at a higher rate than white Americans? Why is his party rolling back voter rights across the country? Why is his party restricting women's access to safe abortions? Why are they rolling back workers' rights and killing unions across the country? I mean, this party is quite literally against equal rights, and you don't even have to list off all of the ways the GOP and Ted Cruz himself are completely discriminatory against marginalized communities. You just simply ask Ted Cruz to name policies where him and the GOP actually support equal rights, and you'd get him. It'd be a gotcha question because he wouldn't be able to list off anything that's meaningful or convincing. Of course, he's against equal rights. It's not like he's even ambivalent towards the idea of equality. He's hostile towards it. And something else that Ted Cruz said really gave Beto another opportunity. Ted Cruz also said, when you have people during the national anthem taking a knee, refusing to stand for the national anthem, you're disrespecting the millions of veterans. And he later said, you have a right to speak, but you can speak in a way that doesn't disrespect the flag, that doesn't disrespect the national anthem. Right here, you call out his hypocrisy because Ted Cruz himself is an individual who has used the term snowflake to describe portions of the left, which implies that they're too politically correct, they're too sensitive, they get outraged over meaningless things. And as someone who's spoken out against political correctness, why is Ted Cruz trying to force his political correctness on all of us? But instead, Beto ended up pivoting to platitudes and called for unity instead, which I don't know what he thought that would accomplish. Now, he was correct to point out how Ted Cruz was being misleading, seeing that he equated protests during the national anthem to flag burning, which was obviously not what the conversation was about. But being against flag burning is also a very politically correct thing. You're against a piece of material being burned, really? Why are you being such a snowflake? I mean, how do you not hit him on this hypocrisy if you're Beto? So I don't know why Beto didn't jump on him in this opportunity. I think, again, it was another missed opportunity. But I do want to get onto a different subject because Ted Cruz was talking about school shootings. This subject came up, and he hypothesized why he believes school shootings are happening. And watch how cringeworthy it is as he tries to convince us that he actually gives a damn at all about the students who are killed in these shootings.
You know, all of us have been horrified as we've seen these school shootings. Santa Fe High School is about a half hour from my house. I was home that morning at 7:30 in the morning when the shooting happened. I jumped in a truck and headed down there. I spent the entire time at Santa Fe High School, that entire day with students, with teachers, with first responders, with parents. It is horrific, and let me say, as the father of two daughters, there is something deeply wrong that we have these shootings. There are a lot of things behind it that have nothing to do with government. They have things to do with things like removing God from the public square, like losing the moral foundation of much of our society, like losing the binds of community and family.
Okay, so that is literally probably one of the dumbest things that I've ever heard Ted Cruz say. And, you know, the bar is low. He's said a lot of really idiotic things, but his contention here is that more guns don't equal more gun deaths. Less God actually equals more gun deaths. So in the event we brought back God into the public sphere, in other words, shove religion down people's throats, well then there'd just be less shootings. So other countries, like France, who have a laïcité system, which puts government above God, who, generally speaking, they're against religion both politically and socially, they must have more shootings there, right? Well, when you look at this graphic from Vox, you'll see that the United States actually has the highest amount of guns and the highest amount of gun deaths per 100,000 people when compared with all other countries in the developed world, and that includes France, a country very much against religion. But I thought that Ted Cruz said more God equals less gun violence. It's almost as if fairy tales about God and superstition doesn't have any impact, and Ted Cruz himself, being a beneficiary of campaign contributions from the NRA, who lobbies against any sort of gun regulation whatsoever, has an agenda to push because that agenda benefits his career. It helps him get elected with these campaign contributions. And when I mentioned at the beginning of this video that Ted Cruz tries to take positives of Beto O'Rourke and spin them into negatives, I have a clip to really demonstrate that in action, because Beto is against the war on drugs, and about 9 years ago, he was open to the idea of debating whether or not legalizing all drugs is a good policy idea. Now, Ted Cruz put Beto in this position where he had to prove that he wasn't in favor of something that was actually very reasonable.
Yes, I want to end the war on drugs, and specifically want to end the prohibition on marijuana.
And Grover, let me point out, he didn't dispute that as 9 years ago, as an elected member of the El Paso City Council, he introduced and advocated for energetically debating ending the prohibition on all narcotics, on everything. He says he doesn't agree with that now, but that was only 9 years ago. And I'll tell you, when it comes to this is an issue that's personal to me. My older sister, Miriam, died of a drug overdose. People all across the state of Texas, 70,000 people a year are dying of drug overdoses in this country. We have an opioid crisis. And I think talking about legalizing all narcotics, I think that is profoundly dangerous, and it doesn't represent the interest of Texans.
So, first of all, wanting to debate whether or not we should legalize all drugs is not unreasonable. Not wanting to debate that is actually the unreasonable position here. But he talked about why this issue is so close to his heart. It's because he had a sister that actually died of an overdose, right? And that's very sad. However, David Doel of The Rational National did a little bit of digging and found out that Ted Cruz is actually lying about his own sister's death here.
She did not die of an overdose. She mixed 2 prescription drugs together that she was taking for actual issues that she had, and that's how she died.
So I'll provide you with a link to that video, because you have to see the whole thing, because even though most of us watching this already loathe Ted Cruz, you'll see him in a completely different light than before, because this is just a new level of loathsome. And this isn't David's opinion. He extensively researched this in that video, and you'll see that Ted Cruz literally exploits his own sister's death to score some cheap political points.
This is an issue that's personal to me.
And the Oscar goes to
Ted Cruz, me. He's got to be the worst actor ever. This is an individual who is literally lying about his own sister's death and trying to exploit that situation for purposes of political expediency. This is the behavior of a sociopath. This is not normal. Normal people don't do things like that. That's a new low, even for Ted Cruz, and I keep saying that, but he keeps lowering the bar. And that's shocking even for Ted Cruz, so I don't even know what to say about that. Shame on Ted Cruz, but I don't think shaming him is enough. I mean, wow, exploiting your own sister's death. That's got to be a new record in politics, right? I know that American politics currently is incredibly stupid, but that's something that I just didn't think I'd see. Unbelievable. Now, Ted Cruz, I mean, if I went through each lie that he said during this debate, we'd be here forever. But I do want to highlight an instance where he tried to gaslight the people of Texas.
We can protect pre-existing conditions, and you need to understand, everyone agrees we're going to protect pre-existing conditions. But we also need more choices, more competition, more options so that prices drop, so that young people coming out of SMU or coming out of schools across this country can afford health insurance instead of facing the disaster that Obamacare has done to our health care system.
And that's your time, Senator. Representative?
I don't know how you're going to repeal every single word of the Affordable Care Act and keep protections for pre-existing conditions.
So that was a great point made by Beto at the end there. But Ted Cruz, I mean, the way he said that, he was so confident in lying. But it was a lie, regardless if he makes it really believable. I mean, he may be a really bad actor, like the worst actor ever, when he's trying to pretend to be sad about things. But when he spews this nonsensical bullshit, I think it's probably persuasive to people who aren't well-versed in politics. So he states that people with pre-existing conditions should still be able to obtain healthcare. Now remember that language specifically. He still thinks that they should be able to obtain healthcare. Well, as Dylan Scott of Vox explains in an article from late August, Texas joined several other states along with Trump's Justice Department in a lawsuit that, if won, would invalidate the ACA's protections for people with pre-existing conditions. And Texas specifically is arguing that the entirety of the ACA should in fact be overturned. Now, since the GOP can't convince anyone that they actually care about people with pre-existing conditions so long as they're trying to undo protections for them, they decided to craft a bill that ostensibly stops discrimination against people with pre-existing conditions. However, there's something really important that they're leaving out with that bill. There's something really important that Ted Cruz is not telling people in Texas. So even if it's the case that they have this bill that stops insurance providers from discriminating against people that have pre-existing conditions, even if they are able to get insurance if they have pre-existing conditions, their bill has a loophole so that those healthcare companies don't actually have to treat patients for that particular pre-existing condition. So when Ted Cruz tells you that he's with you here, he's gaslighting you. He's saying that he wants to protect pre-existing conditions because that's popular, when in actuality, he's allowing these healthcare companies, since he's bankrolled by them, to not treat people with pre-existing conditions. Do you see what he's doing here? It's a bait and switch, and he's gaslighting people. It's despicable. So, by and large, this was a pretty difficult task for Beto, and I think that if you're challenging an incumbent with the advantage, you've got to do everything in your power to move the needle and really have an outstanding performance. And I do believe that Beto held his own. And I want to make it clear that if you want to go up against someone like Ted Cruz and beat him, you have to be a populist. And the way that you do that is by demonstrating to voters that Ted Cruz is corrupt. He's not representing the people of Texas because he is bought off by special interests, he's corrupt, and he's not looking out for them. He's an opportunist who's looking out for his own political career. And there were some moments where I believe Beto was extremely successful at driving that point home.
You know, only one of us has been to each county in Texas and would have an idea of what Texas values and interests are. Within months of being sworn to serve as your senator, Ted Cruz was not in Texas, he was in Iowa. He visited every single one of the 99 counties of Iowa. He went to New Hampshire, he went to South Carolina, he went to the Republican presidential primary states instead of being here. He shut down your government for 16 days in 2013 because too many people were getting too much health care in the United States of America. And in 2015, he missed 1/4 of the votes in the United States Senate. In 2016, he missed 1/2 of the votes in the United States Senate. You tell me who can miss half the days at work and then be rehired for the same job going forward. That's not what Texans want. They don't want somebody who's captured by corporations and political action committees and special interests, because that's where Ted Cruz gets his money. Our campaign is the largest grassroots campaign this state has ever seen, funded by people and only people in every single one of the counties of Texas every single day. Generations from now, people looking back at this moment will not be able to believe that a country $21 trillion in debt, with the greatest levels of income disparity that we've seen since the last Gilded Age of more than 100 years ago, would find as its solution to the problem $2 trillion in tax breaks that disproportionately flow to corporations that are already sitting on record piles of cash and the already wealthy in this country. A tax bill written by the lobbyists for those very corporations. In fact, in one draft, in the margins, written by those lobbyists so that their corporate bosses could see the text before the senators could vote on it. And in the days before and just after Senator Cruz voted for this massive giveaway to the already wealthy, he received more than $120,000 from the political action committees that represent those who benefited from these tax breaks. I believe not in investing in corporations and in special interests. I believe in investing in people, in universal pre-K for every child so everyone has the same starting line in life, in health care for every Texan and every American so they're well enough to be their best, the ability to attend community college or SMU so that you can better yourself and do better for everyone else in your life, in your community, and in this country. I believe in investing in broadband internet in the 50% of rural Texas that today cannot reliably get online. I believe in investing in communities and in people, not in corporations, special interests, and political action committees.
So that, to me, was the highlight of this entire debate, and that clip alone kind of leads me to kind of side with the idea that Beto probably won because it's that clip that went viral. Ted Cruz didn't really have any bright moments like this that got a lot of attention, whereas Beto did, and he made some excellent points. He brought up the government shutdown. He talked about how Ted Cruz is corrupt. He's controlled by special interests. He also sprinkled in some populist policies of his own about universal pre-K and whatnot. So that is what Beto probably should have driven home for the entirety of the debate, but at the same time, Ted Cruz was pretty good at keeping Beto on his toes as well. So, I mean, he lies so much that I think people are probably inclined to believe him. He came in second in the presidential election in 2016. So, I mean, this is someone who is persuasive to average political viewers. So, I don't necessarily know if Beto won, but I'm inclined to think that he did win. However, I don't know if my bias against Ted Cruz is just making me blind to the objective performances that they both gave, but I think that it was relatively equal with Ted Cruz kind of losing a little bit. So at the end of the day, that's my take on it. I'd be curious to know what you all feel about this debate as well. Leave your comments down below because I think that Beto, I wasn't as impressed with his performance as I thought I would be. I think he came off as just way too rehearsed and too standard politician-y with the point especially. But I mean, he didn't do a terrible job, so I don't know. But certainly, I will be curious to know how the next two debates pan out because they have 3 in total. This was the first of 3. So, we'll see. But either way, I hope that Beto beats Ted Cruz because, I mean, Ted Cruz is the most hateable person in Congress, perhaps in the history of American politics. He's that unlikable.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.